Now we've got Pete Buttigieg. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me on.
Now, I do want to note that you are appearing in your personal capacity today. Now, the Trump campaign is clearly struggling to find some line of attack against Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. And what they've landed on is JD Vance now attacking Tim Walz on his military service. So as someone who himself served with you, what was your reaction to Vance qualifying the value of Walz's 24-year military service to this country?
Yeah, this is just not something that service members ordinarily do toward other service members. There's some notable exceptions, including the disgraceful Swift boat attacks against John Kerry, which we're not going to allow to happen again, especially because Tim Walz served honorably. He served for 24 years. In the military, you can retire at 20 years. Tim Walz served for 24, which I'm pretty sure is longer than J.D. Vance had been alive when he finished his tour. None of us are saying bad things about J.D. Vance's service. We're talking about a campaign that not only is building up our candidates and why we believe in Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, but most importantly, talking about what this campaign means for people in their lives. And I think that's the other really interesting and important thing to talk about. It's not just that Tim Walz served and by all accounts was a very good soldier and non-commissioned officer. It's that after that, he went on to lead the Veterans Affairs Committee in the House and make veterans better off on things like mental health and suicide prevention. So it's unsurprising and yet still somehow disappointing that the only thing they can think to do is to go after his service. But maybe the upshot of it is it's going to remind everybody and educate everybody about the fact that Tim Walz is a veteran who served 24 years in the military.
It also seems to have escaped J.D. Vance that his own running mate did the thing that Vance is wrongly accusing Tim Walz of doing, which is evading his service. So do you think that maybe J.D. Vance forgot that Donald Trump very famously found some podiatrist somewhere to say that he had bone spurs to ensure that he wouldn't serve a single day in the military?
Yeah, the contrast couldn't be clearer. Look, both Tim Walz and J.D. Vance came from ordinary beginnings and served in the military. Donald Trump, on the other hand, used his status as a multi-millionaire from the day he was born to be able to, it would appear, purchase a doctor's note that allowed him to fake a disability so that he could claim to be unable to go serve. And I imagine some middle-class or working-class kid went in his place who wasn't rich enough to pull those kinds of strings. That's exactly the point. They don't want to talk about that. They definitely don't want to talk about their ideas for America or Americans. So they do what they always do, which is just to tear down, tear up, and do whatever is most outrageous any given day so that they don't have to defend things like what their policies would mean for veterans, which I think would be a lot of cuts to services, and more generally, they're deeply unpopular policies like tax cuts for the rich and continuing to destroy a woman's right to choose.
You know, Vance and Trump do seem to have a penchant for throwing stones from glass houses. Vance attacks Tim Walz, who served for 6 times as long as Vance served, as avoiding military service, while Donald Trump actually avoided military service. Trump attacks Kamala Harris by denying her biraciality, while JD Vance has 3 biracial children of his own. What do you make of the fact that these guys seem better positioned to be attacking each other than any Democrats?
Well, it's not just that they obviously seem to lack a common sense of hypocrisy or shame. I actually think it is strategic. I think when they do something that would just make a normal person's head hurt, they're doing it so that we're spinning around on how outrageous that is, and not talking about the very real stakes of this election in terms of our everyday lives. What it would mean if Donald Trump and J.D. Vance get their chance to implement Project 2025 and undermine Social Security and Medicare, or try to tear down the Affordable Care Act, or eliminate the Department of Education, or any of the other things they're planning to do that are not just terrible policy, but are extremely unpopular. And so what we have to do, anytime they do this, whether it's attacking the war record of an honor or service record of an honorable veteran, which they've done from, a war hero like John McCain to a retired guardsman like Tim Walz, or blurting out something racist in an auditorium full of black journalists like Donald Trump did a few days ago. Of course, we have to respond to it because these things can't be left without a response. but we respond to it, and then we get right back to our message. We don't let them change the subject. We're going to be the ones who change the channel.
We've seen a number of even Republicans come forward and express dismay at Trump's inability to really control himself. I believe Scott Baio was on Fox the other day begging Trump to stick to policy, to show you the extent to which he's lost the plot here. And yet, at his most recent press conference at Mar-a-Lago, Trump opted to brag that his January 6th insurrection crowd was bigger than Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech crowd, which by the way, is a great way to appeal to the black community. Like, no notes there. I'm sure the black community just loved that. What do you attribute Trump's dissembling to?
Well, again, I think it's actually part of his strategy. The more he can say things that are silly, strange, outrageous, untrue, the less he has to defend his profoundly unpopular vision for America. Part of why he lost the last time is Americans disagree with him on issue after issue after issue. You look at guns, part of what they're going after Tim Walz on. Tim Walz was right to point out that the kinds of firepower and weaponry that he became an expert on during his time in the military have no place in our schools or our neighborhoods or our communities. And those policies around assault weapons, our policies, the policies that a Harris-Walz administration went back, are something the vast majority of Americans believe in. And another example of where the Trump-Vance position really is outside of the mainstream. So you're going to continue to see day after day them do whatever is crazy or outrageous in order to not have to talk about all these things that Americans really, really disagree with a lot.
Let's finish off with this. The overwhelming sentiment that I've gotten from people is that for the first time in a long time, we're seeing a campaign where joy is front and center. Can you speak on the optimism of the Harris-Walz ticket versus the darkness of Donald Trump and JD Vance?
Yeah, I think it's one of the biggest things we have going for us, just as much as the fact that people agree with us on the issues that affect them most, just as much or more than the fact that they have deeply flawed candidates, both in Donald Trump and JD Vance. I think one of the biggest things we have going for us is just the atmosphere that Kamala Harris has created around her campaign. There is an energy to it. There is a joy to it. And I think it's reminding Americans that politics doesn't have to be this death match. Campaigning doesn't have to be just a matter of grim determination. And, part of what we, I think, have as an edge right now, part of why she has overtaken Trump and is now winning this election, is a sense separate and apart from ideology, from issues, Democrat, Republican stuff, just a sense among a lot of Americans that was exhausting, what we lived through, both with the Trump presidency and just with Trump's presence, frankly, in our politics, that there's something about that chaos that's just exhausting and increasingly boring. And we have something very different to offer on our side of the aisle. And that vibe, right alongside, of course, our very substantive policy edge, is part of what I think is going to propel her to victory.
Which, by the way, is why We're Not Going Back has become so potent of an unofficial campaign slogan here. Pete Buttigieg, as always, thank you so much for taking the time. It's great to talk to you.